Paper 1, final sesh. Let's have it. Let's have a sesh. This is the 2024 AQA A-Level Business Paper 1 preview. We're going to go through tips, strategy, and then obviously at the end, the stuff that you want to hear. Let's go. So number 1, usual structure for paper 1, the usual way that it's been in previous years. So it started with 15 multiple choice questions, followed with 2 times 4 markers, that's calculation questions, and then run the gauntlet 9, 9, 9, 3 analyse questions, 3 9 markers back to back to back. And then section C, which is choose 1 from 2 25 markers, that's your evaluate question. And then section D is choose 1 from 2 25 markers, that's another evaluate question. And then 15 plus 8, 2 times 4 is 8, plus 27, 3 times 9, 27, plus 25 equals 100. And all 3 of the papers will be out of 100, therefore coming to 300. Time management. So time management for paper 1, multiple choices, 1 minute each, 15 minutes in total. Calculation, 6 minutes each, 12 minutes in total. 9 markers, 11 minutes each, 33 minutes in total. 25 markers, you're thinking 30 minutes for a 25 marker. So you've got to do 2, that's 60 minutes in total. And all of that adds up to 2 hours, 120 minutes. Now, why am I saying that? I think it's important in this paper more than any other paper to think about your exam strategy, think about your game management. I think it's really important to make a plan on this paper of the order you will tackle the paper in before you enter the exam room, the exam hall, wherever you do it, the gymnasium. I'd start with this. You don't have to do it this way, but I certainly want to think about the order you do the paper in. Nicest 25 marker first, steady yourself, pick the one that's just a beautiful question that you can just tear apart, you can for, you can against it, you can conclude it. You've got application to enhance your answers. So you pick that 25 marker first, get your momentum, get yourself going, but make sure you just have a checkpoint. I'm going to be off this question in 30 minutes. I'm going to be disciplined, and discipline is going to be the key with all of these papers. Then move on to the multiple choice questions, and then move on to the calculation questions. And if you are using a pen and you're one of those people who's having to shake your hand because your thumb's hurting, then this is the time to perfectly rest your hand before you get into the fight later on with the 9s and the 25 marker. So split those 25 markers, have a tactical rest, game management, game management. So checkpoint 2, and you're thinking here based on the previous maths, about 57 minutes, you could call it an hour, but you're just making sure you're around that 60-minute halfway point that you have finished the calculation questions. Give a quick look, a quick sight of the clock to know you're halfway through and it's going well. Then it's the gauntlet. It's the 9, the 9, the 9. And this is really important that you do this together, I think, because you just get into 9 marker mentality and it's just rinse and repeat the 9 marker technique. Butcher them out. Checkpoint 3. 30 minutes left. So you finish these 9 markers, just check you've got 30 minutes, you're managing that time, 30 minutes left to have the fight, and the fight is of course going to be that harder 25 marker that you've left. But of course, you still need to make sure you're disciplined, and with 5 minutes left, making sure you're just, with 5 minutes to go, that you are getting on to the conclusion to make sure you answer the question in the conclusion. So that's a suggested game management. You do not have to do that, but I certainly think it helps to think about the order you do the paper in, because it might not be on this particular paper that doing it sequentially is your optimal way to do it. Moving on to multiple choice questions. So multiple choice questions, of course, you're going to need to know your theories, know your models, know your concepts well. Examples, but it could go further than this. Blake Mouton, Hackman Oldham, Kaplan, Bowman, Greiner, Bartlett, Hofstede, but the list could go on, product lifecycle, Boston Matrix, etc., etc. Don't leave any blank. If you don't have a clue, you don't have a Scooby, guess, because if you guess, you have a 25% chance of getting it right. If you do not guess, you have a 0% chance of getting it right. If you want to practice multiple choice questions, links above there. Click the card up there. There we go. Number 5, calculation questions. So calculation questions, know your formulas. And we're going to discuss a little bit more about the power of the formula later on in this video. But with calculation questions, the reason why it's important to know those formulas is because often the first of 4 marks is just for writing the formula. Especially if you have an absolute mare later on in the calculation, you've got to get that 1 out of 4 at least. Minimum, you're walking away with 1. Nevertheless, give it a go. You can often fight and get 2 out of 4, get 3 out of 4, or even if you're struggling with those numbers and you're not quite sure, make sure you give it a go, give it a bash, and you can walk away and limit the damage if you're really having a bad show. But it should be okay. You should be okay with those 4 markers because you could practice some. Links above there. Lots of 4 markers to have a go with. Big playlist. Next thing is to go through the 9 markers. So 9 markers are, of course, analyse why, analyse how, analyse the impact of a particular concept. Usual traps that are set up to not fall for. Don't fall for these traps. Number 1 is it's likely that if they go for 3, one of the 3 will have a stem. And what I mean by a stem is a line above the question. And the line above the question will give you a context. It will give you an industry to write on. You need to see the stem, recognise the stem, and then make sure when you write your analysis, you are writing through that stem, because you'll need to do that to get into the holy grail of level 3, which is your 7, 8, 9 out of 9. Next trap is it's likely that one of the 3 will have a table, it will have a data. Now you've got to use it. If there's a table there, if there's a data there, you have to use it. You're not going to get into level 3 if you don't use that. Final thing to watch out for is to read the whole question. And it might well be the question where there's no table, the question where there's no stem is where you'll see this, well, most likely anyway. Sometimes these questions are laid out as so. So analyse how XXX, that's a concept, will impact YYY, that's a thing. Example, XXX is training. So analyse how training will impact, but it will be different as a question if it were to be analyse how training will impact labour productivity. That's different to analyse how training will impact employee costs as a percentage of turnover. That's different to if it said analyse how training will impact labour turnover, which is different to if it said analyse how training will impact labour cost per unit. Each time the YYY has changed. So make sure you're clocking the end of the question, and it's most likely with the question that is tableless and stemless that you will see that. Let's move on. 25 markers. 25 markers. Average section C mark, that's the first 25 marker, is usually higher than the section D. I don't think the section D questions are any harder than the section C questions. I just think people are answering the paper sequentially, that's front to back, and so they're running out of time, not good game management. They've got a timing issue on section D, don't get a conclusion in, and that's being problematic for their score and their section D. So this is more reason to use the game management strategy, or at least think about it, as mentioned earlier on, slide 3. 25 markers, make sure you have real-world examples that will enhance your analysis. But avoid just saying specific facts. Try to be analytical. Try to explain why your example, your amazing real-world example, will answer the question that they have asked to you. 8. The power of formulas. So know your formula very well. Obviously, you need to know your formulas to answer the calculation questions. But more than that, the power of the formulas is they can help extend your analysis. Be proactive in using them to enhance your points, to deepen your analysis chains. Some examples. Example number 1, the advantage of training. Well, training may lead to more output in a time period. You could say that. You could say that training leads to more output. Great. But you could take it further. You could use those formulas. You could think, therefore, it increases labour productivity. That's using the power of the formula, taking your analysis that little bit further. Another example. You need to talk about disadvantage of training. Of course, training increases costs. But you could say training increases costs, therefore increasing employee costs as a percentage of turnover. Power of the formula. More. The business switches to just-in-time. Just-in-time, of course, will mean business holds less stock. It holds less inventory. Power of the formula. You could say this will help increase its inventory turnover. So if you know your inventory turnover formula, you can apply into it. You can take your analysis further. Next one. Example is business takes out a loan. Of course, a loan increases debt. Power of the formula. You could go, this will increase the non-current liabilities, therefore the gearing ratio will increase. Boom. Power of the formula. Make sure you learn your formulas, not for calculation questions, but to extend your analysis. Next thing, predicted questions. I'm not doing predicted questions, but what I am doing is thinking about types of questions, and this is the types of questions to think about. Reappearing questions. Questions that are due a reappearance, because Examiners have said they were handled shoddily, they were handled poorly in the last year. So for that reason, they might reappear. The second bucket to think about is favourites. Just questions that just come up every single year, topics on those questions, clearly examiner favourites, clearly you need to be all over. And the third one is cold topics. So these are bigger topics that just seem a little bit quiet. And that's the only reason why they might come up. You have to revise everything, and these thoughts are not paper specific. So when we get into the stuff, it could be they happen in paper 3 rather than paper 1. But you just need to be all over these topics, but you have to revise everything. The reappearance ones. So these ones, I just think, you never know, they might come back because there was a real problem with them in previous years, and I'm talking about last year. Income elasticity of demand. Clearly, price elasticity of demand, everyone knew. Income elasticity of demand was handled less well. They might just bring it back. Capital intensive businesses was a problem last year. And very surprisingly, Elkington's TBL was a problem last year. And that's a big model, lots to talk about there when you can talk about the bottom line of finance, and then of course talking about people, talking about planet, talking about long-term sustainability of having them all. Next one is favourites. So here we're going to go through each of the units and think about those examiner favourites. So unit 1, U1, business objectives. Business objectives. Don't fall down the trap that every single business is a profit maximizer. Many businesses have lots of other things that they need to pursue in terms of their business objectives. If you're Patagonia, you don't necessarily profit maximize. It might be that you want to be environmentally responsible, sustainable. If you are a business that's looking like Temu to grow their market share, well then you're not a profit maximizer right now. In fact, Temu, in fact Spotify, in fact many other businesses are making losses right now, and they do not care, at least in the short term, because their long-term goal, of course, that is to profit maximize, but their short-term goal, their short-term objective is something else. Unit 2, a big favourite is role of stakeholders, stakeholder mapping, knowing those conflicts, knowing the power and the influence diagram. Number 3, e-commerce, multi-channel distribution. Maybe they put some digital marketing into that, but that's always been there. It's been there for very many years now. Unit 4, quality. Quality. Importance of quality. How to improve quality. Difficulties of improving quality. Consequences of poor quality. All of that. Absolute favourite. Moving on to Unit 5, sources of finance. So you're thinking loans, overdrafts, retained profits, share capital, debt factoring. Unit 6 is interpreting those HRM formula. You're thinking labour cost per unit, labour turnover, employee cost as a percentage of turnover, labour productivity. I've done all of those this week in videos. Unit 7, ports 5 forces. Make sure you're over that model. And of course, ANSOF for Unit 8. Love it. They love it. And then we move on to Unit 9, innovation. Innovation, you're thinking the benefits of being innovative, how to become innovative. So you might be thinking Kaizen, benchmarking, entrepreneurship, research and development. And then Unit 10, be on network analysis, critical path. So that's the favourites. Next thing to think about is those really, really cold topics. Just want to be aware of them, be cautious of them. Just make sure part of your revision, you've dotted the I's and crossed the T's on these. So number 1 is scientific decision making. And you'll obviously be comparing that to just using intuition. Maybe it's combined with decision trees. Decision trees wasn't there last year, so maybe they have some sort of mashup of those topics. Scientific decision making seems to be very, very cold. The next is marketing objectives. So we're thinking about marketing objectives. It could be something along the lines of maybe which of them is most important. Is growing market share the most important? You could say growing market share is the most important because it means more sales, more output, bigger market share. You might get economies of scale. But on the other hand, well, some businesses don't actually pursue more market share. It might be just the setup of the business. It doesn't suit them. It might be actually they're pursuing brand loyalty. They're more focused on price elasticity of demand, making it more inelastic. It might be they don't like to pursue market share because that might involve lowering your prices and that might be damaging to brand value. So it could be something there on marketing objectives. Could even see that up to a 25. They haven't gone there yet. Confidence intervals is just out in the wilderness. I don't think it's been in there for 5 years. Make sure you're on top of that. Marketing mix, but for industrial goods, be on top of that. Card for that is up there in the corner. And then pricing strategies, also very cold, very suspiciously cold. Price skimming, price penetration are the two big ones there, so be on top of that. And of course, linking it in your analysis to price elasticity of demand. When we think about skimming, you're targeting those inelastic customers at first. And then price penetration is because you have lots of price sensitive, elastic. Price elasticity of demand is elastic for those that you're targeting as first for price pen. Marketing objectives, already said that, don't know why it's there. Next one is economies of scale. So economies of scale, very, very quiet. Make sure you know the economies of scale for our specification, which is purchasing, which is technical, which is managerial. CAPU. CAPU could suit a 16 marker, maybe a 20, maybe even bigger. The crux of that question is going to be efficiency. So if your CAPU is 100%, yeah, you're very efficient. Yeah, it's good for your cost per unit, but it's problematic for your flexibility. So maybe you want to bring it down from 100 to a lower number to get flexibility. Maybe it'll help you cope with new clients that you're looking to onboard. And you could, of course, relate capacity utilization to capacity in itself. A way to overcome that high capacity utilization is just to extend your capacity. But is there demand there if you do that? And then organizational culture. Learning those types of cultures. So you've got power culture when you've got one individual, probably very centralized. It usually suits smaller businesses, but the problem with power culture is you struggle to grow, you struggle to scale up with power culture. So maybe you need to move into a role culture, and that's those functional areas. That's the Greek temple. I think I've done a TikTok video on that. And when you're thinking about role culture, it's good because people are specialized in their role, but problematic is with role culture. Oh yeah, and it's efficient, of course. And problematic with role culture is it's not very innovative. Everyone's just doing their job, doing their role, doing their responsibility. Not very innovative. So to become innovative, maybe you move on to a task culture. Task culture will be more innovative. And then you've got person culture. And when the person is kind of perceives themselves to be just bigger than the organisation, more important than the organisation. So that's the cold topics there. That's part one anyway, because there's part two. Part two, variance analysis. Very quiet. May just be a cheeky maths question. You never know. Soft, hard HRM, also suspiciously quiet. And this one's very, very quiet. Herzberg, Taylor, could be a question on financial methods of motivation. They obviously have differing opinions of those. You'll just need to know the HR theory very well to answer that question. Be all over that. Are financial ratios useful? I think it's about 4 years cold now. Maybe that's coming back, something in that fashion. So why they're good, why they're bad. They're obviously good because you can look at the liquidity, the efficiency, the profitability of the business. But lots of them are backwards looking, manipulated by window dressing, all sorts of flaws there in financial ratios. And they're just numbers. They don't tell you anything else about the business. Don't tell you about the other bits of the functional areas of the business, like your HR, your ops formulas, your marketing formulas. This would be a horrible one. Just watch out for it though. Is short-termism the biggest influence on corporate objectives? So, of course, short-termism will impact corporate objectives, but there's other stuff. There's the internal environment that matters, the external environment that matters, and also the ownership structure as well will affect corporate objectives. And then we could very likely see a mashup with CSR, corporate social responsibility, Carroll's pyramid, and then a stakeholder, shareholder principles question. I mean, that could be a big fat 25 marker. Next one is competitive advantage, the benefits and the difficulties of competitive advantages. If you look at the card up there, it was for an Edexcel paper last year, Kazoo and Cinch. It was Cinch in particular in that video where Cinch has a competitive advantage, but then I went through the difficulties of having that competitive advantage. Could be used to enhance your analysis maybe in the 25 marker. You never know if it came up that way. But yeah, cards up there. I know it says Edexcel, might still be useful for an AQA paper in terms of your application, enhancing those answers. Retrenchment's quiet. Retrenchment's super quiet. So retrenchment, we've had growth in the last few years, so why not go retrenchment? So is it essential for a failing business? Video's been done on that. And then flexible organisations. Well, flexible organisations, in the last few years, I think last year we had flexible organisations as a question on flexible contracts. So maybe they take another angle this year and look at delayering, for example. That would be an interesting angle. Could even just be a 9 marker for that. So that's your cold topics. Remember, that's not predictions. That's just thinking those 3 buckets. So what seems to frequently come up. The next one was what came up last year and was handled poorly. And then the third one is just bigger topics, just seem awfully quiet. So on the carousel of questions, they've got to make a reappearance at some point. I hope that helps, and I'll see you at the next sesh. See you later. Good luck.